Hello there and welcome to Smallville Chat. I was a fan of Smallville for the whole 10 seasons and really enjoyed the whole decade. Yes, there were issues within those 10 seasons, but still Smallville was a very clever idea, and it came at a very special time for American television drama. It came at a time when American TV shows changed. We were really coming to the end of 90210, the original 90210. I'm not talking about the other rubbish. Melrose Place, we had things like that. We had things like ER. But Smallville was really a groundbreaking show in the sense of being a superhero show. And we'd had superheroes shows before. We had The Incredible Hulk, we had Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman, which I never liked, by the way. We had The Amazing Spider-Man when I was a kid, but Smallville was something different because it was telling a story. It was really going into the core of the pre-Superman story and taking it seriously. Now, the first season, people call the first season a kind of a teen drama. Now, what Alfred Gough and Miles Millar, the guys who developed the show and created the show, come up with this idea of fooling the kids as this was going to be some hip teen drama, but this wasn't. This was a pure superhero show starting at the right age for Clark. He's 15 when Smallville first starts, and it's a great time. And if it was a teen show, I don't think you would have got all the different ages watching it, from 18 to 50, 60. Everyone was watching this because it was a Superman show. There is this debate because it was about Clark Kent and not actually in that Superman era, that actually Smallville wasn't a Superman show. It was a Superman show. It was just a part of his life before he becomes Superman. You may say, well then Mike, how is that a Superman show? It is, because that's who he is. And even in Smallville, he's still that character. He's still saving people's lives. He's still that pure-hearted character. He's just a kid. He's growing up. And the great thing about Smallville is because he's young and he's learning, he does lose his temper at times. He does do things that you don't associate Superman doing. But that's because he's young and he's learning. The genius of Smallville was, a lot of it was, of course, introducing Michael Rosenbaum as Lex was genius. To have Lex Luthor in Smallville was a massive thing. And the idea of having him in this castle, living in the same town as Clark, was brilliant. He was from a wealthy family. He kind of had a dysfunctional childhood. So that was very interesting, and that was the whole point of Smallville. Alan Miles always said that Smallville was the trials of Clark Kent and Lex Luthor, and that was the brilliance of it, and to see the two differences between the characters. Now, what was brilliant about Lex on Smallville was he wasn't the character we knew he was going to become. So there was a story there, because they could have done it the other way. They could have had Lex already be a villain at a young age, which would have been fun, but also doing this story where we see his beginnings and how he becomes that megalomaniac, that insane megalomaniac, it was very interesting to me. And for him, the biggest thing for me was Clark and Lex having a friendship, because then you thought, wow, they're friends, but we know one day they're going to be enemies. That was very exciting, and to think one day on this show we'd see them become enemies, or at least see Lex become what we knew he was going to become all along. That was brilliant. And also with Smallville, you had so many different dynamics, didn't you? Yeah, you had Jonathan and Clark, Martha and Clark. You had Jonathan and Lionel, Jonathan and Lex, Lionel and Martha, Chloe and Lionel, Chloe and Clark. You know, Pete and Chloe. Loads of different things. Lana and Clark in the later seasons, Lionel and Lana and Lex. And these were real characters with big personalities, and that we cared about all of them. People talk about, we got fed up of the Clark and Lana, well, they weren't they? I'm sorry, but Lana Lang was always part of Clark Kent's younger life, teenage life. She was his childhood sweetheart. She was very important to the core story, even in the comic books. Now, I think that she was brilliant on Smallville. People always compare her to Lois and say, oh, Lois is the one true love for Clark, and Lana's this and that. A lot of negative stuff spoken about Kristen Krug, I think was beautiful and amazing as Lana Lang. But also, what I loved about Lana on Smallville, and which I didn't like about Lois on Smallville, was that Lana at least had an emotional backstory. Her parents were killed in the meteor shower. So that gave her an emotional core from the beginning, and Clark always felt guilty that her parents were taken away, because Clark blamed himself for the meteor shower, because basically the meteor shower was fragments of the exploded krypton that followed his ship and came to Earth. So he felt responsible for that, as he felt responsible for Lex becoming bald. And, you know, so he... there was a great phrase in season 1 when people used to talk about the meteor shower and how it affected him. Clark used to say, "I'm sorry," and they say, "It's not your fault, Clark." And Clark had that guilt. Tom Welling did that beautifully. The guilt for Clark written all over his face. It was beautiful. And again, one of the great dynamics, the great relationships, of course. We've spoken about Clark and Lex and the great relationship they had. But I think that Jonathan and Clark was beautiful. That was a proper father and son relationship. But normally on television, whether it's American TV or British TV, there's this thing where we get the teenagers hating their parents. "I hate you, mum and dad. I want to go out. I want to go clubbing. I hate my mum and dad. I hate school. I hate this." Actually, one of the great things about Smallville was the kids on Smallville loved going to school. Well, not necessarily loved going to school, right, that's over the top. But at least they went there. Someone like Chloe loved going to school, loved working in the Torch, loved being the school journalist, the editor of the school paper, and that was, seeing that character's passion was amazing. I loved Chloe because she was a mature teenager rather than a juvenile one. Forget what became of Chloe with the relationship with Oliver. All that was pants. You can forget about that. You can take that as nothing. But early Chloe was beautiful. But the relationship between Jonathan and Clark was brilliant. It was a proper father and son relationship, and when Clark was lost, Clark could come to him, and he would talk to Clark and make Clark feel better about himself. That was, for me, that was the beautiful thing about it. That you saw a man who really loved his son, even though he wasn't his blood, and really would do anything for him. There was in season 3, when Jonathan goes into the Quatchy Caves and speaks to Jor-El, Jonathan says, "Bring him back from Metropolis, please." He goes, "I can't force him to come back." He goes, and Jor-El goes to Jonathan, "Are you willing to sacrifice anything to bring him back?" And he goes, "For my son, I'll do anything." And that brings tears to my eyes, because I don't know real fathers in real life who would say that. All parents are meant to be all for their children. I don't know a lot of fathers in the real world who are like that, and that's not a criticism of Smallville. It's an inspiration to see a father say that, to say, "I will sacrifice anything for my son, and the kid's not even my blood." That's beautiful. And these were part of the emotional ties of Smallville that served the show so well, and really emotional. And you got the core opposite with Lionel and Lex, where Jonathan was so protective of Clark, and Clark didn't understand it. I think one of the great things as well, going back to Jonathan, was how he didn't want Clark to play football. He was trying to explain to Clark, if you use your powers, even by accident, people will be onto you, and that's dangerous. Clark didn't get that. But Jonathan was always trying to protect him, like warning him about the Luthers. And in the early years, Clark didn't listen to that. And that was really an element which was so brilliant. So we go to the opposite father and son relationship with Lionel and Lex. Lionel's parenting to Lex was very, "I'm going to test you. I'm going to put you through the mill. I'm going to make you beg for everything. I'm going to make you fight for everything." But ultimately, that kind of parenting obviously didn't work, because we know what Lex becomes. But ultimately, Lex sees the Kents as Clark as his way of having a real family, of a family of love in it, rather than Lex, which was the Lex and Lionel dynamic, which was really a tough love. And also, we didn't know in the first season, but Lionel thought that Lex smothered his baby infant son Julian to death, but really it was Lex's mum who smothered the baby to death. So, and Lex always kept that secret, so Lionel didn't know no better, so he always hated Lex for that. Lex was his son, he still loved him in his own twisted way. So you had the two opposites of the parenting thing there, and it was really brilliant. Now, what I'm talking about with Lana is when I say she had an emotional background and Lois didn't. That's what I'm trying to say. Lois came in, she had Lois qualities, but the problem is with her, she was there, she was hanging about in the early seasons, and in a way, her 4, 5, 6, 7 seasons 4, 5, 6 and 7, I think she worked better as a character than she did in 8, 9 and 10. But I think the problem with Lois from the beginning, she didn't have an emotional backstory. Personally, I would have brought in an actor to play the general, which is Lois's father, full time, so we could have had a really brilliant twisted father-daughter dynamic there, where he's involved maybe with the Luthers with loads of secrets, and she's always trying to find out. Maybe it had something to do with her mother's death, and that would have been more interesting, and that would have really given Lois an emotional story to work on Smallville. Instead, she spoke a lot, she jibber-jabbered a lot, but really didn't do anything. And yes, in the later seasons we saw her in the iconic position as being a journalist at the Daily Planet, but there wasn't anything, she wasn't really there. She comes originally because she's investigating Chloe's murder. Ultimately, Chloe wasn't dead. I love Erica Durance as Lois, I do. Erica Durance is a beautiful actress, and we've seen that being proven in the Canadian drama Saving Hope. She's wonderful in that. But I think I really would have preferred it. A lot of people don't actually like Lois being on Smallville. I don't hate her being on it, but ultimately putting her on the show poses more questions than answers. So when she first wasn't in, people were saying, well, she knows him now, she knows him without the glasses. Then we go to the core situation for me, that Lois knows Clark's secret by the end of Smallville. I've never liked that aspect. I've liked it that she doesn't know.